Hello, everyone, and welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David Hargis. So whether you're live with us, thank you for joining, or maybe you're watching the replay or you're listening to the podcast, whatever the format, we're just happy you're here. And if you'd like to learn more about our work, you can find us at childoftheredwoods.com. You can find about all of our different programs, including our Constellation program this month. We just released our new theme, which is Island. It's jam-packed with a lot of fun activities. We've got some matching cards for different islands. And let's see, do you have a favorite in here? Oh, our island research guide is a good one. Do you have a favorite activity from this one?
Do I have a favorite?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, probably it would be pinnate versus palmate.
Oh, that's a good one, yes.
Because we're going into the botanical differences between the two kinds of fronds and
That's right.
And how palmate leaves actually look like your palm. So we'll have a little activity.
That's right. Yeah, and we have, let's see, is this it? No, this is a different one. Make your own study and make your own different tree. So a lot of fun stuff in there, and that's all part of our Constellation program. But you're not here for Constellation.
No.
You're here to learn all about an amazing Montessori concept.
Yeah, a really crucial concept.
It is.
Yes. Yeah, so we are actually talking about a really critical Montessori theory concept today that is usually kind of summed up in like a trivial little, I don't know, kind of phrase or saying. And that is the phrase or saying you might have heard is children are not empty vessels to be filled. And Maria Montessori actually did say that.
Mm-hmm.
And
several times,
yes. Yeah. And we can, we tend to like sum up progressive education as like, oh, children aren't vessels to be filled. It's something that we were all taught back in our education classes in college. Do you remember being taught about children aren't empty vessels, right? Sure. They're active learners. That's right. How do we know this? We know it primarily because of Maria Montessori's student Piaget, who really publicized that aspect and named it constructivist theory.
That's right.
But we're not going to give you a lecture about constructivist theory. You can come to the Montessori, the Homeschool of the Redwoods primary and lower elementary courses to learn more of that kind of deep theory. We want to hone in that empty vessel concept, and we're going to do it. We were actually inspired to talk about it by one of our members, Kayla, who we are interviewing.
Yeah, we're going to feature Kayla today. You know, she wrote something in her. We asked folks if they'd like to share things about their journey that we can then talk about, because it's so helpful, I think, to know that we're all together in this journey. And one of the things she shared is she writes that, quote, one of my favorite quotes from Maria is from The Secret of Childhood, which I see you have a copy of right here, where she says, and she's quoting Maria here, adults look upon a child as something empty that is to be filled through their own efforts, as something inert and helpless for which they must do everything. And she concludes, I love the reminder that the child does not need to be filled and is not helpless.
Right. Yeah, we tend to think even today of children as being kind of helpless. And,
that's right.
They're very little for a long time. And when they're very little, we feel like we have to do everything for them.
That's right.
Maria Montessori really changed the game because she believed children were so capable.
That's right. And the Secrets of Childhood, that was one of the latter books, right? She wrote
No, it was actually one of the first.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So when did she publish that? In the 19-teens or something?
Yeah.
So
I don't remember.
I was going to say, I think I had misremembered. I was thinking it was one of the later books, but even if it had been, I was going to say that this formulation, the children are not empty vessels or, rough clay that the adult is supposed to shape or should look at as in charge of shaping completely, is old. It's part of her work from, I think, very, very early on. And she formulates it in many different places, including here. So we want to talk about that. It's such an important one. But we also want to meet Kayla.
Kayla gives us a great introduction to talking about this topic. So let's learn a few facts about her first. Kayla is a mom of 2 living in Pennsylvania with her husband. And when she wrote this, she had 2 children, one that was 16 months old and one 3 years old. So it's a little snapshot into her life during that time period. Yep. Those are really fun ages.
They are.
So she's also an alumna of our Child of the Redwoods in general. She's completed both our Homeschool of the Redwoods primary course, and she's a member of Constellation, our monthly thematic curriculum program.
That's right.
Yep.
Featuring Island this month.
Yep. So a few things that I thought were really interesting about Kayla in their life. So she considers herself a stay-at-home mom. Her husband also has a really flexible work schedule. So she made a point to say that he's really active in their homeschool family life, which is really awesome. She herself went to a Montessori kindergarten when she was young, which is so cool. And she has really positive memories of it and wanted to bring that to her children as a stay-at-home parent. As a family, they live in this quaint little town in the heart of the Allegheny Forest. So being in the woods is a big part of their life. They do all the outdoorsy kind of stuff. They camp, they hike, they kayak, they bike, cycle, all the things. So it sounds like they have a really nice rustic lifestyle.
Sounds pretty nice. We live in San Francisco and it's fun, right? We've lived in big cities for all of our married life, but I grew up in a really small town in Texas. So a real rural, totally different than the life I have had as an adult. And sometimes I think back, wistfully thinking about, the beauty of rural life.
Do you?
Sometimes, yes, not so much that I've moved back to the countryside, but definitely, it does leave an impression. And I wonder sometimes whether a childhood spent in the countryside versus in an urban landscape is better.
Yeah, I know. We've had this debate many times as married couples. I'm always on the side of let's move into the woods where we're away from people and part of nature. And you're like, but the museums and the nightlife and getting out to go to see shows and all the possibilities that are within the city,
That's right.
And thinking back to all the kind of cool things that we stumble upon in the city.
Yep.
We just walk practically out our front door and
it's just a vibrancy.
We sat down in attended a Randy Newman concert just one Saturday out of the blue. We've just had all these experiences of kind of spontaneous city life. But I don't know that it's necessarily a busier life, than the one that Kayla is describing.
That's right.
There's a lot to be said for exposing our children to both kinds, but I think in both settings, as parents in this culture, we feel the pressure to do more because our children are growing up so fast. So we've got to get them to the next stage. We've got to experience all the things that are available, for children at that age. And so I'm thinking back to even when we had littles and we were leading as slow a life as we could. We could do it, but still experiencing the pressure of this kid's activity, this children's museum is doing this thing, we got to do this. They're old enough for this now. And I don't know that that's not necessarily also true in a rural life. Your activities are different for sure.
I think I was thinking about it in terms of constructed versus unconstructed opportunities. And I think in the city, there's a lot more of constructed opportunities. There's museums and shows and playgroups and just access to the stuff.
Yep.
And in rural life, there's, as I remember, and I doubt it's changed radically, there's just a lot less. But you have plenty of opportunities to be very, very busy.
Right.
And, Kayla talks about biking and hiking and camping and what I remember growing up is, having a garden, a large garden and lawn work and working in the backyard with my dad.
I think Maria Montessori would have approved.
Yeah. So it's not that we weren't busy. It's just that we were busy in different ways.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about Kayla's life. give us a little snapshot of
Yeah.
what was it like if you could put yourself in Kayla's household during this time when she's got a 16-month-old kind of running around, not quite an active little toddler.
Going into the time machine here. Okay. So she says that, she had at this time a 16-month-old who's an early riser. So we have alone time together before the 3-year-old wakes up. We always have breakfast as a family around 8:30 or 9, and I'm grateful to have the circumstance to rarely feel rushed in the mornings. After breakfast, if the weather is favorable, we often take a walk around town to visit shops and find things to explore or walk to Grandma and Papa's house, which is a few blocks away. We also have a Papa in our family. After lunch, the 16-month-old takes a nap, and the 3-year-old and I get some focused time together. Sometimes we head back out to walk to the library, grocery store, or post office. Other times we work on household tasks together or try a lesson. Lately, with spring on its way, we've been out in the yard digging, scooping, hunting for worms, etc. So our time machine is seasonally appropriate because it's spring again.
Yes.
And time for all that good stuff. Once the 16-month-old wakes up, he joins us in whatever we're doing. When it comes time for me to prep dinner, my husband often takes the boys up to our finished attic for music and dancing. And after dinner, the boys often play independently together before we go upstairs to prep for bedtime. Our 3-year-old at this point likes to say, "Let's start a rumpus." So we indeed have a rumpus.
I'm glad they lean in.
Before settling down for bedtime routine and stories, that's an average day for us. Very busy. We try to have certain things we consistently do on certain days. For example, Tuesdays are library day. Thursdays we might visit Grandma and Papa. Sundays are movie and homemade pizza night. It gives us some weekly structure without being too rigid. Well, that is it feels like a full house, full scheduled house.
Yeah.
They have pizza night. They've got dancing in the club upstairs. They've got the worm movie night, grandma.
Lots of rumpus.
Of course, lots and lots of room for that rumpus. You got to save room for rumpus.
That's right. So yeah, that is what strikes me too, especially thinking about this concept of empty vessels, that like what she is describing is really what we would describe as like a full life, full of vibrancy and activities and fun and action. And so I think that, I have several thoughts on this. First, I think it sounds like a beautiful schedule,
Totally.
Second, like one of the things that popped up was she mentioned how she has like pizza night and, they try and kind of theme their days. And this is actually a really good thing to do. We talk in our lower L course, especially about how not to try to overschedule all of your curricula work. So if you're homeschooling, you might like pick a day to give a history lesson, pick a day to give your math lesson, and try not to like do everything at once. It's such a common question for our parents. It's like so many lessons, so much curriculum. How do you do it all? You don't.
And
it's better to give lessons that are like more impactful and more exciting and that are just like in one special time than to try and cram in great lessons in every subject every single day.
Yeah, and that feeds into this idea of how we mold the child. And I think we have a sense sometimes as adults, especially maybe as homeschooling parents, that we have to be busy, that busyness is important because then we can show that the child is learning, and we confuse busyness with learning. It's actually true in regular school too, and in the office and
in work. I was going to say,
like it's just kind of.
I think it's just true.
We
everywhere.
have a bit of a bias toward that, quantity over quality.
Yeah, we do. All right, so let's kind of dig into that quote. I love doing this. Let's because we do this a lot in the courses and in Constellation as well. So let's go to The Secret of Childhood and find that quote that she mentioned.
Yes.
And I have it bookmarked right here. So if you are following along with us, we're in the mass market paperback copy
from the 70s, I think.
The Secret of Childhood. I know, such a sweet old fashioned cover. And we're on page 16, which is at the end of a chapter. Oh, and it's one of my favorite chapters too. I didn't realize this. Do you know which chapter it is?
Tell me.
It's in chapter 2 of The Secret of Childhood called The Accused. Woo! And it's the chapter where Maria really lays it into parents. I remember the first time I read this chapter, I was like, whoa, like she comes across sounding so judgy. Parents, you have it all wrong. But then later on, she goes to say, like, unless you pinpoint, basically, essentially, like, if you're never accused, like, if you can't accuse yourself of not doing things, not seeing the right way, then you can't ever learn to course correct, right? So that's what she's trying to do in her work. So
I confess that I have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed,
yes,
perhaps. Yeah.
Essentially, yes. So right, exactly. I know we had the same thought there. Yeah. So the first time I read this, I had little children of my own. She talks about Freud here, and it's just like her writing is so fiery and so accusatory that it really rubbed me the wrong way right away. I was like, whoa, like she's really pinning all of the world's problems on parenting. And here we are, like, just trying to do the best we can to make it through the day while our children tantrum, and like we just, it's hard, right? And so my response to Maria at that time was, I don't know, shove it. Like, I was like, I am doing my best, Maria.
You accuse yourself.
Right, exactly. I know. I had all kinds of words for her, but I actually stayed with this chapter a long time as that new parent, because I had all those feels, right? And then I just really sat with this whole book for a long time, and just thought over and over. And every time I come back to this chapter, I'm able to, like, put it into a different perspective. So anyway, so that is to say, I'm not going to read the whole entire chapter. But if you are inspired to feel feels with Maria, then you should, read both chapter 1 and, even more importantly, The Accused. And this is how The Accused ends. So let's read this last 2 paragraphs. She says, in their dealings with children, adults do not become egotistic, but egocentric. They look upon everything pertaining to a child's soul from their own point of view, and consequently, their misapprehensions are constantly on the increase. Because of this egocentric view, adults look upon a child as something empty that is to be filled through their own efforts, not the child's own efforts, but through our efforts. This is still true today.
For sure.
Right? She says, something empty that is to be filled through their own efforts as something inert and helpless, for which they must do everything, as something lacking an inner guide and in constant need of direction. In conclusion, we may say that the adult looks upon himself as the child's creator and judge the child's actions as good or bad from the viewpoint of his own relations with the child. The adult makes himself the touchstone of what is good and evil in the child. He is infallible, the model upon which the child must be molded. Any deviations on the child's part from adult ways is regarded as an evil, which the adult hastens to correct. An adult who acts in this way, even though he may be convinced that he is filled with zeal, love, and a spirit of sacrifice on behalf of his child, unconsciously suppresses the development of the child's own personality. It's kind of heavy, right? So egocentric versus egotistic, right? So we as an adults, if we see ourselves as being always right, the child shouldn't have taken the cookie, the child shouldn't be jumping on the couch. Like, we know the right way to sit on the couch. Well, we know how many cookies is appropriate.
That's right.
Then we have to naturally conclude that the child is bad. Right?
Yeah, and
that it's our job to, like, fix them. Because
and she goes further too. Because she's clear that it's not just in a negative context. Even if you think you have good intentions, you can't. And so I was thinking, it's very easy for us to sort of see our children as little versions of ourselves. Like, oh, I was just like, I do that all the time. Oh, I was just like that when I was so-and-so's age, when I was our oldest son's age. He reminds me so much myself, and I want to make sure that he, doesn't make the same mistakes that I made when I was his age, or has a better life or an easier life or whatever. And that's from a pure love. You want nothing but success and love, but it's not. It's comes from a worldview that puts you at the center, instead of thinking of him as his own person who's figuring out in his own ways. You're thinking of him as like a carbon copy, like a vessel that's being filled, and you somehow have your real time machine and you can shape it. So whether we're judging and frustrated, like stop jumping on the couch, or it's more like, oh, but just do it this way. It starts with a sense of I'm in control and I'm going to be self-centered.
Yeah. And more, this is a theme, like you could say it's the whole theme probably of this whole book, right? She also says something inert, that we see the children as something inert.
Yeah.
As something that is inert is something that is not moving, something that is stationary,
like a lump of clay.
Something that is helpless. And so, in that perspective of teaching, we do all the action as teachers. We don't just correct the child when they've gone astray, but we actually have to direct them to what to learn, because we're assuming that they don't have any drive or interest of their own. Right. And she really, and she also says that we treat them as though they are something lacking an inner guide.
Yep.
And then she goes on and talks about the sensitive periods. And so really it is basically like a thesis for the rest of the book.
It's so interesting. This idea of the vessel, it's knowing a little bit more about Maria's life. It's so interesting. The two parts of Maria are really coming, like this is the synthesis of them. The part of her that was the age of reason, age of nature, naturalism, post-Freudian, or contemporary of Freud, Darwinian, post-Darwin scientist who is influenced by, she's probably thinking of like the tabula rasa, the concept of the blank slate, which is an old concept. I think Aristotle formulated some version of it. John Locke famously talked about it. He described the human mind as sort of like a blank piece of paper. He didn't believe that it was just completely empty, like an actual lump of clay, but he did think that it was not highly influenced when it came out. It's going to develop in response to the natural stimuli. So this is kind of a naturalism. The other part of her is her Catholicism, which people don't talk a lot about. And she hid for most of her life because it was not accepted. She wanted to be taken as a serious scientist, and she felt that she couldn't be taken as a serious scientist, especially a female scientist who, if she also professed her Catholic devotion, which was very significant. I think she was a seriously devout Catholic, just a very private one, and she hid that, but it's so obvious it influences her. So for her, there's something in between, right? She says, she's saying like there is a molding that happens to the child, but she's a deist. She believes that it's the lump of clay has been the breath of life. It would be her formulation. I mean, I don't know. We'd have to ask her, get in our time machine and ask her. But she would, if she were to take the biblical account, she would say the breath of life, the breath of God has passed over the clay and has animated it, right? So you're not just a lump of clay, right? You're brought into the world with something else. And you could see kind of how that might influence. Now, of course, there's a lots of science and psychological studies and things we've done over the years that show how all this is true. But I think in the way that she's articulating it, it has, I hadn't really thought of it before, but it really seems to sort of embody these two pieces of her that were in conversation. The part of her that believed in rational scientific process, and the other part of her that was willing to believe in a transcendence.
Yeah. Well, she describes the child as, so, if we reverse the sentence, let's try and do that, because I think that's fun to do with text sometimes. So here's the sentence itself. Because of this egocentric view, adults look upon a child as something empty that is to be filled through their own efforts, as something inert and helpless for which they must do everything, as something lacking an inner guide and in constant need of direction. So let's reverse it. So let's say, because of this, what is the opposite of egocentric? What would it be like this? This loving, this
altruistic,
loving view,
selflessness,
right? Adults look upon a child as something, not something empty that is to be filled through their own efforts, but as something not empty,
right?
Right? Something that is the opposite of empty, something that is living and breathing and active, right?
Yeah.
That is not to be filled through our efforts, but that is to be filled through their efforts.
Yeah, because they bring into the world something already.
Right.
She was willing to believe, she was willing to accept that in a way that more classical Enlightenment thinkers were not. And part of that is this sort of, if you look more broadly at the development of Enlightenment thinking and the conflict with the church and how that all panned out, she's in a way, and why she has to be secret about her beliefs, but she's also sort of rejecting that. And it's interesting, we've kind of gotten to a point now where we understand that the child isn't an empty vessel. Like we were all taught that in college when we were learning, but not because we've all become theologically profound, but because our science and research and knowledge has proven that. And she, through her intuition or something like that, was able to, her genius was that she was able to combine these parts of her life together and understand something true about human nature that other people had not quite perceived.
So with this new view, we can look upon a child as something that is filled with something active. A child that is not something that is inert and helpless. A child that is capable and interested and engaged. Not a child for which we must do everything for, but a child who has a lot of say in what they are wanting to do and are capable of doing. She says, as something lacking an inner guide, we must see the child as having an inner guide.
That's right.
Yeah. And she says, we shouldn't see the child as being in constant need of direction. We should see the child as being not something that's in constant need of our direction, but that doesn't mean that they don't need our guidance. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. I guess I would probably say the word is constant there. Like we don't constantly needing to be directing them.
That's right.
And in fact, we know from her creed, follow the child, that it's actually she means the opposite. The child is the one doing the leading, and we are actually being directed by the child.
Yeah, it's just that the child is the teacher of the man or the adult, which is Whitman, right? I think that comes from Whitman and probably from the Bible before then. And she's sort of riffing on that.
Yeah. So I know it's lovely. It's a great quote to dig into. So as we kind of begin exploring this concept of the empty vessels, we had a lot of thoughts. There's John Locke, and then we started kind of thinking about the concept of the empty vessel itself. It's used in positive ways as well, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, because it's being ready to be filled with something.
Yeah, and we talk about filling ourselves up in colloquial language. We're talking about, I need to fill my cup, right? What does that mean? Like self-care,
That's right.
Goodness, right? You need to fill it up.
Out with the bad air, in with the good air.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And we talk about filling ourselves up with restoration and rest. We talk about filling ourselves with love, not hate.
That's right.
So this concept of filling
it's a deeply symbolic concept.
It is.
And even the concept of like thinking of the mind as a blank slate, is making some sort of analogy to a symbolic analogy, right? That it's like a board that hasn't been written on yet or something, and it's super old, right? So we're trying to think, where did this concept come from? And seems like Aristotle had formulated something as Stoics. It's definitely you can definitely find plenty of examples from the Bible, which Maria presumably would also have been familiar with. That's what was the thing that made me think like, oh, this is sort of a conversation, because I'm certain she was both well informed about, based on what I know of her life, she knew a lot about people like John Locke. She also knew a lot about St. Paul. And when he talks about being poured out like an empty vessel, and there's something, because of her knowledge and her brilliance, she's starting to make this sort of creative connection between the two.
Yeah. So, thinking about if there is an empty vessel, it wouldn't be the child.
No.
Maria sees the child as being, if we're talking biblically, she sees the child as being the closest to that divine wisdom, as having access to some kind of divine wisdom.
Yeah.
And then she spends a lot of the rest of her life trying to nail it down scientifically, right? She's like, well, it's got to be, some part of it has to be these sensitive periods that are emerging. And some part of it, a way that we can access it has to be the way we observe the child. And like, we can kind of intuit, but she deeply believed that children had that inner drive, that inner guide, as she mentions, and so, the assumption has to be that in order to see that wisdom, in order to get there, we as adults actually have to be the empty vessels ourselves.
Yeah. And to be clear, I always like to emphasize that it doesn't require you or us to have her same faith practice or spiritual beliefs, because her work has been borne out through a lot of different experiments. But it's really interesting to think about. So in other words, you can come from a variety of Montessori is for everybody. And you can bring your own unique self to it, and you'll find value and beauty in it. But I think it's really important to think about in terms of the context of what inspired her thinking. And I do think it's important for us as Montessorians have to believe that the child is capable and has born, whatever you want to call that thing, a fire to learn, a spark, a ability to self-educate. There's something in there that is they bring with them.
Yeah, the concept of emptying oneself isn't solely a Christian concept.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about worldwide religions or
no religion,
this is a concept that's existed in humanity for a long time. You can find the concept of emptying oneself in Buddhism, in Hinduism, and all the world's major religions. There's some kind of concept of having, we have to open our hearts.
Yeah, or even modern self-help or psychology, psychotherapy. Right, exactly.
Yeah, which are all based on these old concepts.
That's right.
So, Maria really believed that in order to see the true child, we have to empty ourselves in some way. And that, I think, is why she believed that observation was actually a kind of meditation, that you actually really needed to be in that mindful, meditative state in order to see the true child in front of you. And so often parents will come to our courses and they'll say, okay, well, how exactly do I observe? And, the answer is kind of like, well, it's a little bit different for everybody, but you should practice mindful meditation, and quiet, calm presence, and hearing and feeling the silence, around you, all of which is taught through, in the Montessori pedagogy.
That's right.
She values silence. She values that empty space. She actually tells parents to shut up, very, very distinctly. She's like, do not interrupt the child. Do not speak unless, it's absolutely necessary if the child is concentrating. Why? Because if you yourself are like being egocentric over here,
even if it's out of a good intention,
even if from good intentions, then you're going to miss what's going on in the child, and you're going to disturb this magic that's happening.
So a practical example, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, is you are playing a Montessori lesson game and you say, go get a fork, and the child brings you a spoon. And you don't say, wrong, that's not a fork. What would you say?
You say, thank you for bringing me the spoon, or whatever.
Exactly. Right. because you're affirming the effort instead of, if you, the connection here is that even with that adjustment saying wrong, thing or whatever, you're becoming egocentric. There's this sort of a molding that's happening. Instead, you want to affirm the activity and have them try again, without putting on them this sort of, I don't know, there's this kind of a construction of, this is where the border ends. This is like, I'm going to shape you. The clay is here and it stops at this point and there's no more. And the little things like go get the fork versus the spoon, they add up and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it does sort of imbibe throughout the entirety of the philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's kind of conclude here by talking about, there's a beautiful quote in The Child and the Family that I want to go to that really illuminates this, where she just has some more beautiful words and it really explains what she's talking about. So it goes like this. She says, teaching charity, and here I am in Child of the Family. I'm on page 23 in this book here. Okay, it's a collection of Montessori's lectures about parenting and the specifically Montessori philosophy in the home.
Yeah.
So she says, teaching charity, Christ said, quote, do not put out a smoking candle. That is, do not bother putting out a candle that is already extinguishing itself. We can borrow this principle of charity and apply it to education. And she quotes here, do not erase the designs the child makes in the soft wax of his inner life. Do not erase the designs the child makes in the soft wax of his inner life. Which is, if we were just like rattling on and on and on about things, thinking we had to fill our children, like say we read a study that said children who are exposed to more vocabulary words have higher scores.
That's right.
When they're teenagers.
Homes and with 1,000 books are.
Yes. And so what if as parents, we've got that in our head, we're like, got to give our kid more vocabulary words. And we go out on a nature hike and we're sitting there and our child pauses and gazes at a bird in a tree. What if we were to say, oh, do you know the name of that bird? I think that it's a pigeon, and you know where pigeons live. They live in North America, and you often find them in cities. And a lot of people call them street rats. And what if you just right? Like street rat birds. What do they call them anyway? Like, what if you were just like rattling on and on and on and on and on?
Don't tell Ernie.
Wait, let me get out my phone. I'm going to look up pigeons, and here's all the taxonomy about pigeons. And what if you were doing that? And the child wasn't able to hear the bird song, or wasn't able to watch the way the pigeon ruffled its feathers. Or
you're bringing the lesson.
Yes.
You're making a lesson happen.
You are making a lesson out of it. And that's not to say that teaching opportunities aren't great in the world. In fact, that's the way we believe that the child does learn best.
Yeah, right.
But if you don't take that pause to follow the child and see what is the child drawn to allow that silence and that space, that emptiness, and you're just trying to fill it with a bunch of words, you are messing with that soft wax that the child is trying to mold.
That's right.
So she goes on, she says, so do not erase the designs the child makes in the soft wax of his inner life. This is the greatest responsibility for the adult who educates the child who is in the process of constructing himself. She says, the fundamental educational concept is that we must not become obstacles to the development of the child. Knowing what we must do is neither fundamental nor difficult, but to comprehend which presumptions and which vain prejudices we must rid ourselves of in order to be able to educate our children is most difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she talks about ridding ourselves of prejudices a lot, which is a kind of emptying, right? Empty yourself of prejudice, empty yourself of bias, empty yourself of expectations about what that child might achieve in the future.
That's right.
Which is so hard to do. We all want to raise children who are high achieving little geniuses who are happy and successful.
Well, we want them to
life,
be,
right?
We're we want the best for our children.
Yes, we do.
And I love but the formulation that you're making is absolutely right. We tend to want to think if the child is the empty vessel, we need to be the empty vessel. And we've had a very spiritual oriented episode here, but one more piece here that came to mind as we were thinking about this in terms of where this idea of the vessel. And it actually is from the Bible. It's from 2 Timothy. It says, "For the time is coming when people will not put up with sound teaching, but having their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own desires." This is St. Paul writing. And he concludes, "As for me, I am already being poured out as a libation." So he's saying, I have to pour myself out. He's coming to the end of his life at this point. He also feels time passing. But I think symbolically, this idea of like, we have to be the vessel that is being emptied. And again, we don't know exactly what all the things that Maria read. I wouldn't be surprised if she had some familiarity with this concept of being poured out like an empty vessel from 2 Timothy.
I don't have any doubt.
Yeah. And is reflecting on that and saying, how do we want to create the people of the future that create the peaceful world that we want, the Edenic world that we can have? It starts with children. Children have this ability, if we can foster that. And what we have to do as adults is we've got to stop getting in their way. We have to stop accumulating for ourselves things that suit our own desires, and instead be willing to be humble.
Yes.
So philosophical, this is a philosophy heavy topic, but I liked it myself. I think it's very interesting. And going back to Kayla, I think it's so nice for you to share. Obviously gave us a lot to think about. I love the idea that she's going through. What I liked about her story was that they're doing all this nature stuff. There's lots of good family, lots of love in that house. It seems like beautiful story. And so it sounds like constructing the environment and observing the child, which is the way forward, right? It's not follow the child off the cliff. It's make sure the environment doesn't have a cliff to jump off, and then let the child explore and not get in their way. So I love that story. Thank you so much, Kayla, for that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If you have questions or feedback, you can always email us at hello@childoftheredwoods.com. If you're curious more about Maria Montessori's philosophy and how to implement it into your home, you can go to childoftheredwoods.com to learn more about our programs. And we're going to be back next Tuesday at 1:00 to talk to you some more.
We're doing another Montessori Essential. This one, geometric cabinet.
Geometry cabinet.
Yes.
Sounds fun. Thanks, friends.
Bye.